In the twilight years of the Dragon War, when the ancient stones of Skyrim still echoed with the thunder of Thuum and the shadows of great wings, there existed a secret so profound that even the mighty dragon priests dared speak of it only in whispers. This is the tale of their forbidden conspiracy, a truth buried deeper than any barrow, more dangerous than any dragger, and more precious than all the gold in Blackreach combined. Picture, if you will, the great libraries of solitude in those forgotten days, when knowledge flowed like rivers through halls of carved stone and polished marble. Here, among scrolls that had witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, our story begins on a quiet autumn evening, when the first drops of rain began to kiss the ancient windows. The air hung thick with the scent of parchment and candle wax, while somewhere in the depths of the archive, destiny stirred like a sleeping dragon. Brother Alduin's Rest, that was what the scholars called him, though none remembered why. A gentle soul with eyes the color of winter sky, he had spent countless years tending the forgotten texts with the reverence others reserved for prayer. His fingers, stained permanently with ink, moved across the pages like a musician's across harp strings, and his voice, when he read aloud, carried the music of ages long past. But on this particular evening, as the rain began to drum its ancient rhythm against the stones, Brother Alduin's Rest discovered something that would change everything he believed about the world. Hidden beneath layers of seemingly innocent scrolls about dragon breeding habits and temple maintenance schedules, his trembling hands found a manuscript bound in leather, so dark it seemed to drink the candlelight. The words within spoke not of the glorious dragon cult known to history, but of something far more complex and quietly profound. They told of 13 dragon priests who had gathered in secret chambers beneath the earth, their masks glinting in torchlight as they made a pact that would echo through eternity. The document trembled in his hands as he read of their forbidden meetings, of knowledge hidden from their dragon masters, of a conspiracy so vast and so carefully woven that it had shaped the very foundations of the world he knew. But the manuscript ended abruptly, torn at a crucial moment, just as it began to reveal the true nature of their secret covenant. The final visible words burned themselves into his memory like dragon fire. And so the 13 swore by blood and shadow that when the time of choosing came, they would, and then nothing but ragged parchment and the weight of unanswered questions. And so our tale begins in earnest, with a gentle scholar holding the first thread of a mystery that would unravel the very fabric of accepted history. The world of ancient Skyrim, in those days before the great conspiracy came to light, existed in a harmony that few in our modern age could imagine. Dragons soared overhead like living legends, their shadows blessing the fields below while mortals went about their daily lives in peaceful reverence. The relationship between dragon and man was not one of conquest, as some histories would have us believe, but of symbiosis as natural as the changing of seasons. In the great temples that dotted the landscape like jewels in a crown, the dragon priests served as bridges between the mortal realm and the divine will of their draconic masters. These were not the withered draga of later tales, but living beings of flesh and blood, wisdom and ambition. They wore their ceremonial masks, not as prisons but as symbols of their sacred trust, each one crafted with care to reflect the personality and power of its bearer. Brother Alduin's Rest had grown up in this world of quiet devotion and scholarly pursuit. His childhood had been spent in the shadow of the great library, where his mother had served as keeper of the illuminated manuscripts. She had taught him to read before he could properly walk, tracing letters in the dust while she spoke of ancient heroes and forgotten realms. His father, a temple scribe, had shown him how to prepare parchment and mix inks that would last for centuries, each lesson delivered with the patience of one who understood that knowledge was humanity's greatest treasure. The daily rhythm of life in those times followed patterns as old as the stones themselves. Morning prayers rose with the sun, carrying the voices of the faithful skyward on wings of incense and hope. The dragon priests would emerge from their private chambers, their robes rustling like silk in the wind, to lead the ceremonies that marked each day's beginning. Their voices, when they chanted the ancient words, seemed to harmonize with frequencies deeper than human hearing, as if they spoke directly to the bones of the earth itself. But it was in the quiet hours after the ceremonies, when the great halls fell silent and the candles burned low, that the real work of preservation began. Scribes like Brother Alduin's Rest would gather in small circles, copying texts by the warm glow of oil lamps, their quills scratching out the eternal dance between thought and parchment. They transcribed everything from agricultural techniques to astronomical observations, from poetry that could move mountains to recipes for healing draughts that could mend both body and spirit. The dragon cult's influence extended far beyond mere religious observation. They were the keepers of law and order, the arbiters of disputes, and the guardians of learning. When merchants traveled between settlements, they carried letters of safe passage blessed by the priests. When children fell ill, their families sought healing in the temple infirmaries. When the harvest was threatened by unseasonable weather, the priests would call upon their dragon masters to intercede with the forces of nature itself. Yet even in this apparent golden age, Brother Alduin's Rest had begun to notice subtle inconsistencies that troubled his scholarly mind. Certain texts seemed to contradict each other on matters that should have been settled doctrine. Some manuscripts bore signs of alteration, words scraped away and replaced with different phrasing that changed the meaning in ways both small and significant. When he had questioned his superiors about these discrepancies, their answers had been polite but evasive, like morning mist that slips through grasping fingers. The dragon priests themselves, those towering figures of authority and wisdom, sometimes spoke in hushed conferences that ended abruptly when ordinary mortals approached. He had glimpsed them exchanging glances that carried weights of meaning he could not fathom, and more than once he had seen them handling documents that seemed to appear and disappear without explanation. Their usual demeanor of open teaching sometimes gave way to moments of guarded secrecy that felt as foreign to the temple atmosphere as winter frost on summer flowers. But these observations had remained merely curious puzzles until that fateful evening when the torn manuscript had fallen into his hands like a key to a lock he had never known existed. Now, as he sat in his small chamber with the forbidden document spread before him, Brother Alduin's Rest understood that he stood at the threshold of something far greater and more dangerous than simple scholarly curiosity. The world he had known, built on foundations of trust and reverence, might be hiding secrets that would shake those very foundations to their core. And somewhere in the darkness beyond his flickering candle, the whispers of 13 ancient conspirators seemed to call his name, drawing him toward truths that had waited patiently in shadow for someone brave enough to seek them out. As the weeks flowed by like pages turning in an ancient tome, Brother Alduin's Rest found himself observing the world around him with eyes newly opened to subtlety and shadow. The torn manuscript had become his secret companion, hidden beneath the floorboards of his modest chamber, yet its incomplete revelation haunted his waking hours like a half-remembered dream. Each day brought fresh observations that painted the familiar patterns of temple life in shades he had never noticed before. The first changes he noticed were in the rhythms of conversation itself. Where once the dragon priests had spoken openly in the common areas of the temple, their voices carrying easily across the stone halls, now they seemed to favor the deeper chambers and more secluded alcoves. Their words, when he could catch fragments, carried an urgency that had not been present in earlier times. He began to recognize certain phrases spoken in the ancient tongue, words that seemed to pulse with hidden significance when whispered between the masked figures during their private moments. Brother Alduin's Rest started keeping a journal of these observations, writing in a cipher he had learned from studying merchant codes in the archive. Each entry revealed another small piece of a puzzle whose full shape remained tantalizingly out of reach. On the 7th day of Frostfall, he noted that High Priest Morokei had received a visitor cloaked entirely in black, whose face remained hidden even within the sacred halls. Their meeting lasted only minutes, but afterward, Morokei had spent hours in the deepest part of the temple, in chambers that most scribes were forbidden to enter. The changes extended beyond mere conversation into the very fabric of daily ritual. Certain ceremonies that had been performed openly for generations were suddenly moved to private chambers or conducted at hours when most of the temple inhabitants were asleep. Brother Alduin's Rest noticed that supplies were being requisitioned for activities that had no obvious connection to normal temple functions. Rare inks appeared in quantities far beyond what any copying project would require, while precious metals and gems disappeared from the temple vaults without explanation in the official records. Most disturbing of all were the alterations beginning to appear in texts he knew by heart. Passages he could recite from memory were subtly different when he encountered them in newly copied manuscripts. The changes were small but significant, shifting emphasis here, altering context there, gradually painting a picture of the dragon cult that emphasized absolute obedience over the scholarly curiosity that had always been encouraged. It was as if someone was deliberately reshaping history while it was still being written, crafting a version of events that served some purpose he could not yet understand. His investigation led him deeper into the labyrinthine archive system, following references and cross-references like threads in an increasingly complex tapestry. In forgotten alcoves and dust-covered shelves, he discovered documents that seemed to exist in multiple versions, each telling the same story with subtle but crucial differences. Some spoke of the dragon priests as willing servants of their masters, while others hinted at relationships far more complex and potentially troubling. The breakthrough came on a rain-soaked evening in late Seed, when Brother Alduin's Rest discovered a hidden compartment in one of the oldest reading desks. Inside lay a collection of documents that made his pulse quicken with their obvious significance. These were not official temple records, but personal correspondence between dragon priests, written in various hands and spanning several decades. The letters spoke of meetings held in secret, of knowledge preserved against future need, and of preparations for events that the writers seemed to believe were inevitable. One letter in particular caught his attention, written in the distinctive hand of Chrysi, a dragon priest, whose mask was said to grant insight into the nature of time itself. The words seemed to burn with quiet intensity as Brother Alduin's Rest read them by candlelight. Chrysis wrote of dreams that came to him in the deep hours of night, visions of a future where dragons no longer ruled the skies and mortals had to forge their own destiny. He spoke of the necessity of preserving human knowledge and culture against a time when divine protection might no longer be available. But it was the final paragraph of Chrysis's letter that sent chills through the young scholar's frame. The dragon priest wrote of the 13, that inner circle referenced in the torn manuscript, and of their sacred duty to ensure that humanity would survive whatever trials lay ahead. He mentioned specific preparations that were being made in secret, knowledge being gathered and hidden, and most intriguingly, contact with powers beyond the normal sphere of dragon influence. The implications of these discoveries weighed heavily on Brother Alduin's Rest's mind as he walked the familiar halls of the temple. Each dragon priest he encountered now seemed to carry themselves differently, as if bearing invisible burdens that grew heavier with each passing day. Their public demeanor remained unchanged, still the wise and benevolent guides he had always known, but beneath the surface he sensed currents of tension and anticipation that spoke of momentous events approaching. His scholarly training had taught him to approach evidence with careful methodology, to build conclusions on firm foundations of verified fact. But the pattern emerging from his investigations defied easy categorization. What he was discovering suggested not a simple conspiracy, but something far more nuanced and profound. The dragon priests appeared to be engaged in activities that contradicted their public loyalty to their draconic masters, yet their motivations seemed rooted in love rather than rebellion, in preservation rather than destruction. The weight of this knowledge began to affect his sleep, filling his dreams with images of masked figures gathering in torchlit chambers, their voices rising and falling in chants that seemed to call across the centuries. He would wake with the taste of ancient air in his mouth and the sound of dragon wings echoing in his ears, as if some part of him was being drawn backward through time to witness events that had shaped the very foundations of the world he knew. And still the questions multiplied like seeds scattered by autumn wind. What knowledge were the 13 so determined to preserve? What future were they preparing for with such elaborate secrecy? And most troubling of all, what would happen to someone who stumbled upon their carefully guarded secrets in an age when the conspiracy they had woven still pulsed with hidden life beneath the surface of accepted history? As winter settled over the temple like a blanket of contemplative silence, Brother Alduin's Rest knew that his quiet life of scholarly routine had ended forever. The path ahead led into shadows where ancient secrets waited with patient hunger, and where the whispered words of 13 long-dead conspirators still echoed with power enough to reshape the world of the living. The transition from curious observer to active investigator came as naturally to Brother Alduin's Rest as the changing of seasons, though he understood that with each step deeper into the mystery, he moved further from the safe shores of accepted knowledge into waters that had claimed other scholars before him. The hidden chamber beneath the temple's east wing beckoned to him like a siren's call, its existence revealed by careful study of architectural inconsistencies he had noticed in the building's layout. Where official plans showed solid stone, his measurements suggested empty space, a void in the heart of the sacred structure that existed without explanation or acknowledgement. The entrance, when he finally located it during the deep hours of a moonless night, proved to be hidden behind a section of wall decorated with dragon motifs that seemed to shift and writhe in the flickering torchlight. The mechanism that opened the passage was elegant in its simplicity, requiring not force but knowledge, a specific sequence of touches applied to carved scales that had been worn smooth by countless hands over the centuries. As the stone panel slid aside with barely a whisper of sound, Brother Alduin's Rest felt the weight of history settling around his shoulders like an ancient cloak. The chamber beyond defied his expectations in every possible way. Where he had imagined dust and abandonment, he found a space maintained with careful devotion, its walls lined with shelves that held more books and scrolls than some entire libraries possessed. Braziers filled with ever-burning flames cast dancing shadows across texts written in scripts he recognized, and others that seemed to belong to entirely different traditions of learning. The air itself seemed thick with accumulated wisdom, as if the thoughts and words of generations had taken on physical substance within these hidden walls. At the chamber's heart sat a table carved from a single piece of what appeared to be dragon bone, its surface polished to mirror brightness and inscribed with symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Upon this table lay a collection of documents that made Brother Alduin's Rest's previous discoveries seem like mere appetizers before a great feast. These were the true records of the 13, written in their own hands and sealed with their personal marks, chronicles of a conspiracy that had unfolded over centuries with the patience of growing trees and the inevitability of changing tides. The first document he examined was bound in leather that felt warm to the touch, as if some trace of living fire remained trapped within its depths. The opening words, written in the flowing script of Azidal, spoke of the moment when the 13 had first gathered in this very chamber, their dragon masks reflecting the eternal flames as they swore oaths that would bind them across lifetimes and beyond death itself. But these were not oaths of rebellion or treachery, as Brother Alduin's Rest had half expected. Instead, they were vows of preservation, promises to safeguard the treasures of human achievement against a future that all 13 seemed to perceive with crystalline clarity. Azidal's account painted a picture of the early days of the Dragon War that differed dramatically from accepted histories, where official records spoke of humans grateful for draconic protection against other dragons. Azidal described a more complex relationship built on mutual benefit, but shadowed by the understanding that such arrangements were temporary by their very nature. The dragons, for all their power and wisdom, were creatures of a different order of existence, and their priorities did not always align with the long-term needs of mortal civilization. The 13 had recognized this fundamental truth earlier than most, and their conspiracy had grown from the realization that humanity's survival might one day depend on their ability to stand alone. But rather than plotting open rebellion, they had chosen a more subtle path, one that honored their oaths of service, while simultaneously preparing for a future when such service might no longer be required or desired. They had become gardeners of knowledge, cultivating seeds of learning and culture that could survive even if the great tree of dragon rule were to fall. Each document revealed another layer of this intricate plan. Connaric had established secret schools where human children learned arts and sciences beyond what the official curriculum provided. Volsung had created hidden caches of books and artifacts throughout Skyrim, each one protected by wards that would activate only when the need became great. Rhaego had developed new forms of magic that drew power from sources other than the draconic Thuman, ensuring that human wizards would not be left defenseless if their current patrons were to disappear. But perhaps most remarkable of all was the work of Vokurn, whose specialty had been the preservation of memory itself. Through techniques that blended magic with scholarship, he had found ways to encode vast amounts of information into forms that could survive almost any catastrophe. Songs that seemed simple contained entire libraries of technical knowledge when properly decoded. Decorative patterns in temple walls held mathematical principles that would not be rediscovered by mainstream learning for centuries. Even children's games had been crafted to preserve essential skills and concepts across generations. The scope of their undertaking became clearer with each document Brother Alduin's Rest examined. The 13 had not merely been preserving random fragments of knowledge, but had instead conducted a systematic analysis of what humanity would need to thrive independently. They had identified critical gaps in mortal understanding and had worked to fill those gaps through careful research and experimentation. They had anticipated problems that might arise centuries in the future and had prepared solutions with the patience of immortals and the wisdom of true scholars. Yet running through all their careful plans was a thread of deep melancholy that touched Brother Alduin's Rest's heart like winter wind. The 13 had understood that their work would require them to live double lives, maintaining perfect facades of loyalty, while secretly preparing for a day when that loyalty might be tested beyond endurance. They had known that discovery could mean not merely death, but something far worse, the destruction of everything they had worked to preserve. And they had accepted these risks willingly, driven by love for humanity and faith in its potential for greatness. The most disturbing revelation came in a document written jointly by all 13, their various hands creating a tapestry of perspectives on a single terrible truth. They had not been working in complete secrecy after all. At least some of the dragons had been aware of their activities, but rather than stopping the conspiracy, these ancient beings had chosen to allow it to continue. The document spoke of conversations between Connaric and his dragon master, dialogues that revealed a level of understanding and mutual respect that transformed Brother Alduin's Rest's entire concept of the relationship between the two species. The dragons, it seemed, had their own concerns about the long-term stability of their rule. They understood that power based solely on strength was inherently fragile, and that truly lasting influence required the willing cooperation of those being ruled. Some among them had begun to perceive that the time might come when stepping back from direct control would serve both dragon and human interests better than maintaining the current arrangement through increasingly forceful methods. As dawn light began to filter through the hidden chamber's concealed vents, Brother Alduin's Rest sat surrounded by revelations that would have shaken the foundations of accepted knowledge throughout Skyrim. But rather than feeling overwhelmed, he experienced a profound sense of rightness, as if puzzle pieces scattered across his lifetime had finally begun to form a coherent picture. The inconsistencies he had noticed, the subtle tensions he had observed, the careful alterations to historical records, all made perfect sense when viewed through the lens of the 13's great work. Yet questions remained, mysteries that seemed to deepen rather than resolve as his understanding grew. If the conspiracy had succeeded in its preservation efforts, where were the hidden schools and secret caches now? Had the knowledge they had worked so hard to save actually survived into the present age, or had it been lost despite their careful preparations? And most intriguingly of all, were there others like himself, scattered across Skyrim and beyond, who had stumbled upon fragments of the 13's legacy, and were even now working to piece together the full scope of their achievement? The decision to venture beyond the temple walls in search of the 13's hidden legacy came to Brother Alduin's Rest, like dawn breaking over distant mountains, gradually illuminating possibilities he had never dared to consider. For weeks after discovering the secret chamber, he had remained within the familiar confines of the archive, poring over documents that revealed layer upon layer of the conspiracy's intricate planning. But the texts themselves were only part of the story, fragments of a vast tapestry whose full pattern could only be understood by walking the paths the 13 had carved across Skyrim's ancient landscape. The preparation for his journey required delicate maneuvering within the temple hierarchy. Brother Alduin's Rest could not simply announce his intention to explore remote barrows and forgotten ruins without arousing suspicions that might prove dangerous to both himself and the secrets he sought to protect. Instead, he crafted a proposal for a comprehensive survey of regional historical sites, framing his expedition as scholarly research into the evolution of dragon cult architecture across different periods and locations. His reputation for meticulous documentation and his genuine expertise in architectural history made the proposal both credible and appealing to his superiors. High Priest Morokei's approval came with unexpected enthusiasm, along with resources that suggested the masked figure understood more about the true nature of the expedition than his formal words indicated. Maps appeared that showed routes between ancient sites with remarkable precision, and provisions were allocated with the generous hand of one who knew that important work was being undertaken. Most tellingly, Brother Alduin's Rest was assigned a traveling companion whose qualifications seemed almost suspiciously perfect for the journey ahead. Sister Valdris the Chronicler had arrived at the temple only months earlier, bearing credentials from the great library at Windhelm, and carrying herself with the quiet confidence of one who had spent years walking the dangerous paths between knowledge and power. Her age was difficult to determine, as her face bore the timeless quality that sometimes came to those who had dedicated their lives entirely to learning, but her eyes held depths that spoke of experiences far beyond those of an ordinary scholar. When she spoke of ancient sites and forgotten lore, her words carried the weight of personal familiarity rather than mere academic knowledge. Their first destination lay 3 days' travel to the north, following paths that wound through valleys where autumn painted the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. The journey itself became a form of meditation, each step carrying them further from the world of accepted knowledge into territories where truth wore different faces and history whispered secrets to those willing to listen. Sister Valdris proved to be an ideal traveling companion, her conversation flowing between scholarly discourse and comfortable silence as naturally as the streams they followed through the mountain passes. As they walked, she shared stories that seemed to dance on the edge between history and legend, tales of dragon priests who had walked these same paths centuries earlier, carrying burdens of knowledge that transformed them from mere servants of draconic power into something approaching wisdom incarnate. Her knowledge of the ancient sites they planned to visit went far beyond what any written source could have provided, including details about hidden chambers and secret passages that had never appeared in official records. When Brother Alduin's Rest asked about the sources of such precise information, her smile carried mysteries that deepened rather than resolved his questions. The barrow of Cornaric the warlord rose from the landscape like a stone mountain carved by hands, both human and divine, its architecture blending draconic grandeur with subtle elements that spoke of purely mortal artistry. Unlike the grim tomb that later generations would associate with such structures, this barrow had been designed as a place of active use, its chambers flowing together in patterns that facilitated both ritual and research. Sister Valdris led them to an entrance that seemed to exist in perfect harmony with the natural rock formations, so skillfully integrated that it appeared to be part of the mountain itself rather than an addition imposed upon it. The interior chambers revealed themselves as Brother Alduin's Rest had hardly dared to hope, preserved by wards so sophisticated that time itself seemed to have touched them lightly. Walls bore frescoes depicting scenes from the conspiracy's early days, showing the 13 gathered around tables covered with scrolls and artifacts, their masked faces turned toward each other in poses that suggested both secrecy and profound mutual respect. But these were not mere decorations intended to impress visitors. They were functional elements of a vast information storage system that turned the entire barrow into a three-dimensional archive. Sister Valdris demonstrated the activation sequences for various chambers with the fluid expertise of long practice, her hands moving across carved surfaces in patterns that awakened sleeping enchantments and brought dormant knowledge blazing into light. Scrolls emerged from hidden alcoves, their preservation so complete that they might have been written yesterday rather than centuries ago. Books opened to reveal illustrations that moved with subtle magic, showing processes and techniques that no static image could adequately convey. And throughout it all, the presence of Cornaric himself seemed to linger like incense in the air, his wisdom made manifest in the careful organization of everything his barrow contained. The documents they discovered painted a picture of the conspiracy's operational methods that filled gaps in Brother Alduin's Rest's understanding, while raising entirely new questions about the scope of their activities. Cornaric had not merely been collecting knowledge haphazardly, but had instead been conducting systematic research into specific areas that the 13 had identified as crucial for humanity's long-term survival. His work on metallurgy had produced techniques for creating weapons and tools that could match draconic craftsmanship without requiring draconic assistance. His studies of agriculture had developed crop varieties and farming methods that could ensure food security even during the harshest winters or driest summers. But perhaps most remarkable were his innovations in the field of magic itself, research that challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between mortal practitioners and the sources of mystical power. Where conventional wisdom taught that the greatest magic required either draconic blessing or dangerous bargains with daedric forces, Cornaric had discovered methods for tapping into energies that flowed through the world itself, techniques that any properly trained human could learn and use without compromising their independence or their souls. The implications of such discoveries went far beyond mere academic interest. They represented nothing less than the keys to magical freedom for all of humanity. Yet even as Brother Alduin's Rest marveled at these revelations, he became increasingly aware of Sister Valdris watching him with an intensity that suggested evaluation as much as companionship. Her questions about his interpretations of what they found seemed designed to test not merely his understanding, but his commitment to the principles that had driven the 13's great work. When he spoke of the conspiracy's noble goals and the wisdom of their methods, her approving nods carried implications that made him wonder exactly who had truly initiated this journey and for what ultimate purpose. The answer came as they prepared to leave Cornaric's barrow, having spent 2 days documenting its treasures and absorbing the lessons its careful preservation had made possible. Sister Valdris stood at the threshold between the ancient chambers and the world beyond, her silhouette framed by afternoon sunlight that seemed to transform her familiar features into something altogether more mysterious and significant. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of revelation that Brother Alduin's Rest had been half expecting since their journey began. She was not, she explained. Merely a fellow scholar who had stumbled upon fragments of the 13's legacy through independent research. Instead, she represented something far more extraordinary and hopeful, a continuation of the conspiracy itself that had survived across the centuries through careful recruitment and patient teaching. The 13's work had not ended with their deaths, but had instead evolved into a tradition of guardianship that ensured their precious knowledge would never be lost to the ravages of time or the ignorance of those who failed to understand its value. The organization she served, if it could be called that, existed as a network of scholars and preservationists scattered across Tamriel and beyond, each working in apparent isolation while actually contributing to a grand design that spanned generations. They were the inheritors of the 13's vision, carrying forward their mission of safeguarding human knowledge and preparing for whatever challenges the future might bring. And now, having observed Brother Alduin's Rest's dedication and understanding, they were extending an invitation for him to join their ranks and take his place in a story that was still being written. The weight of this revelation settled over him like a cloak woven from equal parts honor and responsibility. To accept would mean leaving behind the simple life of temple scholarship he had always known, embracing instead a role that would require him to maintain the same careful balance between public service and private mission that had defined the 13 themselves. But to refuse would mean turning his back on the greatest scholarly adventure in history, abandoning the chance to help preserve humanity's heritage for generations yet to come. As they began their journey toward the next site on their carefully planned itinerary, Brother Alduin's Rest understood that he was no longer simply following a trail of ancient clues, but was instead walking a path that would define the rest of his life. The conspiracy of the 13 had reached across the centuries to claim him, and he found himself surprisingly eager to discover where that path might lead. The voice of Azidal seemed to echo through the corridors of his barrow as Brother Alduin's Rest and Sister Valdris descended into chambers that had been sealed for centuries, their footsteps awakening enchantments that brought the ancient structure slowly back to life. Unlike Konarik's martial grandeur, Azidal's domain spoke of subtlety and scholarship, its walls lined with alcoves that contained not weapons or treasure, but books, scrolls, and artifacts that pulsed with the accumulated wisdom of ages. Here was the heart of the 13's intellectual enterprise, the place where knowledge had been not merely preserved but transformed into something approaching living memory. The activation of Azidal's primary archive required a ritual that Sister Valdris performed with the reverence of long practice, her hands moving through gestures that seemed to pull responses from the very stones themselves. As magical energies awakened throughout the barrow, Brother Alduin's Rest experienced the extraordinary sensation of the building, recognizing his presence, ancient wards testing his intentions before allowing him deeper access to secrets that had waited patiently through centuries of silence. The acceptance, when it came, felt like receiving a blessing from the past itself, a welcome extended across the vast gulf of time by minds that had understood the importance of what they were preserving. The central chamber proved to be unlike anything Brother Alduin's Rest had encountered in his years of scholarly research. Where most archives stored information in static form, requiring readers to extract meaning through their own efforts, Azidal had created something approaching a living library, a space where knowledge could communicate directly with those who sought it. Crystalline formations throughout the room held captured memories that could be experienced rather than simply read, allowing visitors to witness historical events through the eyes of those who had lived them. Books opened themselves when approached by serious seekers, their pages turning to exactly the information needed to answer unspoken questions. The first memory Crystal Brother Alduin's Rest encountered contained Azidal's own recollections of the conspiracy's founding moment, that fateful gathering when 13 dragon priests had first articulated their shared vision of humanity's future. Through Azidal's preserved perceptions, he experienced the weight of that ancient decision, feeling the mixture of loyalty and concern that had driven the conspirators to risk everything for the sake of preserving mortal achievement. The emotional resonance of the memory was so powerful that for long moments after its conclusion, he found himself struggling to remember his own identity, so complete had been his immersion in Arcydal's consciousness. Other crystals revealed the painstaking process by which the 13 had identified and categorized the knowledge most crucial for human survival. They had begun with practical concerns like agriculture, medicine, and metallurgy, but had gradually expanded their scope to include philosophy, art, and the more esoteric branches of magical study. Each area had been assigned to the conspiracy member best qualified to preserve and develop it, creating a division of labor that ensured comprehensive coverage while allowing individual specialists to pursue their research with focused intensity. The depth of their scholarship became apparent as Brother Alduin's Rest examined documents that revealed the 13's analysis of human potential. They had not merely been collecting existing knowledge, but had instead been actively pushing the boundaries of what mortals could achieve, conducting research that challenged fundamental assumptions about the limitations imposed by their non-draconic nature. Arcydal's own work on enchantment had produced techniques that rivaled anything achieved by the great dragon mages, while his studies of historical patterns had allowed him to predict social and political developments with remarkable accuracy. But perhaps most fascinating were the records of the 13's interactions with their dragon masters, conversations that revealed a complexity of relationship that defied simple categorization as either servitude or rebellion. The dragons, it appeared, had been well aware of their priests' extracurricular activities, but rather than viewing them as treachery, many had actually encouraged the research as beneficial to the long-term stability of their rule. A series of recorded dialogues between Arcydal and the dragon Sarota showed a relationship built on mutual respect and shared intellectual curiosity, with the dragon actively contributing insights that helped advance the priest's understanding of magical theory. These revelations forced Brother Alduin's Rest to reconsider fundamental assumptions about the nature of the Dragon War and its aftermath. The standard historical narrative portrayed the conflict as a simple rebellion of humans against draconic tyranny, but the evidence preserved in Arcydal's archive suggested something far more nuanced and complex. Some dragons had apparently recognized that their direct rule was creating long-term problems that could only be resolved by giving their subjects greater autonomy and self-determination. The conspiracy of the 13 had served their interests as much as humanity's, providing a means for gradual transition rather than catastrophic conflict. The implications of this understanding resonated through everything Brother Alduin's Rest had believed about his world's history. If the Dragon War had actually been a carefully managed transition rather than a desperate struggle for survival, then many of the assumptions underlying current political and social structures might need to be reconsidered. The relationship between mortals and the few dragons who still occasionally appeared in modern times took on entirely different meanings when viewed through the lens of ancient cooperation rather than historical enmity. Sister Veldris, who had been quietly observing his reactions to these discoveries, finally spoke about the broader mission that had brought them to Arcydal's barrow. The modern continuation of the 13's conspiracy faced challenges that their ancient predecessors could hardly have imagined, problems that arose not from external threats, but from the very success of their preservation efforts. Knowledge that had been carefully hidden to protect it from destruction now risked being lost simply because those who might benefit from it had no idea of its existence. The network of inheritors that Sister Valdris represented had been working for generations to address this problem, carefully revealing preserved knowledge to those who could make good use of it while maintaining the secrecy necessary to protect their sources. They had influenced the development of magical techniques, guided advances in craftsmanship and agriculture, and even shaped political events by ensuring that crucial information reached the right individuals at precisely the right moments. Their work required the same careful balance between openness and discretion that had characterized the original 13's activities. But the scope of preserved knowledge had grown beyond what any single organization could effectively manage, no matter how dedicated its members or sophisticated its methods. Arcidal's archive alone contained enough material to revolutionize a dozen different fields of study, while similar repositories throughout Skyrim and beyond held treasures that could benefit countless generations if properly distributed and applied. The time had come, Sister Valdris explained, to begin a more systematic process of revelation, one that would require many more dedicated scholars willing to serve as bridges between ancient wisdom and contemporary need. The invitation she had extended earlier took on new dimensions as Brother Alduin's Rest began to understand the full scope of the work involved. This was not merely an opportunity to study fascinating historical materials, but a chance to participate in an ongoing effort to shape the future development of human civilization. The knowledge preserved by the 13 represented tools that could be used to address problems that had not even existed when they were first collected, solutions to challenges that each generation would face in its own unique way. As they prepared to examine the deepest levels of Arcidal's archive, Brother Alduin's Rest felt the weight of history settling around his shoulders, like a mantle passed down from teacher to student across the centuries. The conspiracy of the 13 had not ended with their deaths, but had instead evolved into something larger and more enduring, a tradition of scholarly service that transformed individual researchers into links in a chain of preservation that stretched from the ancient past toward an uncertain but hopeful future. The whispered voices of the long dead seemed to welcome him into their ranks, ancient wisdom acknowledging the dedication of a new guardian who would carry their legacy forward into ages they could not have imagined. In accepting this role, Brother Alduin's Rest understood that he was not merely studying history, but was instead becoming part of it, adding his own chapter to a story that would continue long after his own voice had joined the gentle chorus of those who had served knowledge above all other masters. The deeper chambers of Arcidal's barrow awaited, their secrets ready to transform his understanding once again, while somewhere in the darkness beyond their torchlight, the future itself seemed to whisper promises of discoveries yet to come. The morning mist clung to the valleys, like ancient memories refusing to fade as Brother Alduin's Rest and Sister Valdris made their way toward the barrow of Vokun the Learned, whose mastery of temporal magic had earned him a place among the 13 that transcended mere scholarly achievement. The journey from Arcidal's domain had taken them through landscapes that seemed to exist at the intersection of different ages, where standing stones marked with dragon script shared space with ruins whose origins predated even the earliest human settlements in Skyrim. Each step forward felt like movement through layers of accumulated history, as if the very ground beneath their feet held memories of all who had walked these paths before them. The challenges they faced along the way proved to be tests as much as obstacles, puzzles that required not strength or cunning, but understanding of the principles that had guided the 13's great work. Ancient ward stones that blocked certain routes would part only for those who demonstrated proper respect for the knowledge they protected, while hidden mechanisms throughout the landscape responded to scholarly insights rather than physical keys. Sister Valdris moved through these trials with the confidence of long familiarity, but she encouraged Brother Alduin's Rest to develop his own methods of recognition and response, preparing him for the day when he might need to navigate such protections without guidance. The first significant challenge appeared as they approached a bridge spanning a chasm whose depths disappeared into mist and shadow. The structure itself was magnificent, carved from single pieces of stone, so perfectly fitted that no mortar was visible anywhere in its construction, but the way forward was blocked by a barrier of pure force that shimmered with barely contained energy. Ancient runes along the bridge's sides pulsed with soft light, their patterns suggesting a lock that required not a physical key, but a demonstration of philosophical understanding. Brother Alduin's Rest studied the inscriptions with the methodical patience his years of archival work had taught him, recognizing elements from various magical traditions woven together in ways that created entirely new meanings. The solution, when it came to him, spoke to the fundamental unity underlying the 13's diverse specializations, the recognition that all knowledge served a common purpose regardless of its immediate application. As he spoke the words that expressed this understanding, the barrier dissolved like morning frost before sunlight, allowing them passage into territories that few living beings had entered for centuries. The landscape beyond the bridge carried an atmosphere of profound anticipation, as if the very air had been charged with expectation for so long that it had begun to take on physical properties. Trees grew in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, their branches reaching toward each other across clearings to form natural archways that framed vistas of exceptional beauty. Streams flowed in courses that followed no obvious topographical logic, yet created harmonies of sound that seemed to carry meaning just beyond the threshold of comprehension. Even the wildlife moved with unusual purpose, as if participating in some vast natural ceremony whose significance transcended ordinary understanding. Vulcan's barrow, when it finally came into view, challenged every assumption Brother Alduin's Rest had developed about the relationship between form and function in Dragon Priest architecture, where other tombs had been built to endure through static preservation. This structure seemed to exist in a state of constant subtle change, its walls shifting through variations so gradual that individual alterations were impossible to perceive. Yet the cumulative effect created the impression of a building that lived and breathed with the rhythms of time itself. The entrance portal flickered between different configurations, sometimes appearing as a simple doorway, other times expanding into a grand archway that seemed to welcome visitors from multiple periods simultaneously. Sister Valdris explained that entering Vulcan's domain required a form of temporal synchronization, an alignment of personal time with the archive's internal chronology that allowed visitors to exist safely within the accelerated flows of preserved experience. The process felt like stepping into a gentle current that carried consciousness along streams of accumulated memory, each moment stretching to contain vastly more experience than normal perception could accommodate. Brother Alduin's Rest found himself aware of multiple layers of time operating simultaneously, his present awareness coexisting with echoes of past visits and glimpses of potential futures. The interior chambers defied conventional spatial relationships as completely as they challenged normal temporal experience. Rooms seemed to exist at multiple sizes simultaneously, intimate studies that could expand to accommodate vast gatherings when the need arose, while corridors stretched and contracted according to the urgency of those who walked them. Libraries contained books that rewrote themselves based on the questions readers brought to them, while laboratories held experiments that had been running continuously for centuries, their results accumulating across timescales that spanned multiple generations of researchers. In the central archive, Brother Alduin's Rest encountered the most sophisticated information preservation system he had ever imagined possible. Vulcan had not merely stored knowledge, but had created a dynamic environment where different types of understanding could interact and evolve, generating new insights through combinations that their original creators had never considered. Mathematical principles preserved in crystalline matrices could merge with historical narratives stored in flowing light patterns, producing analytical frameworks that illuminated both past events and future possibilities. Magical techniques captured in temporal loops could be modified in real time based on the needs of contemporary practitioners, ensuring that ancient wisdom remained relevant to modern challenges. The scope of Vulcan's achievement became apparent as Brother Alduin's Rest explored deeper into the archive's multidimensional structure. This was not simply a repository of the 13's collective knowledge, but a living laboratory where their research continued to advance even in their absence. Automated systems carried forward investigations that had been begun centuries earlier, following research protocols so sophisticated that they could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining the essential integrity of the original inquiry. Questions that had puzzled the ancient conspirators were gradually resolving themselves through processes that operated on timescales measured in decades rather than moments. But perhaps most remarkable of all were the temporal viewing chambers. spaces where Vulcan's mastery of chronological manipulation allowed visitors to observe historical events with clarity that surpassed even the most detailed written records. Brother Alduin's Rest found himself able to witness the 13's actual meetings, experiencing their discussions and debates with immediacy that made him feel like a participant rather than a mere observer. The emotional weight of their decisions became real to him in ways that no amount of documentation could have conveyed. The genuine love and concern that had motivated their conspiracy, transforming from intellectual understanding into heartfelt conviction. Through these windows into the past, he watched as the 13 had grappled with questions that still resonated in his own time. How could they preserve human independence without betraying their oaths of service to their dragon masters? What knowledge was essential for survival, and what could be sacrificed if necessary? How could they ensure that their hidden teachings would reach future generations without falling into hands that might misuse them? The discussions revealed minds of extraordinary sophistication wrestling with problems that had no easy answers, their solutions emerging through careful collaboration and mutual respect. The viewing chambers also revealed aspects of the conspiracy that the written records had only hinted at, showing the 13's relationships with contemporaries who had not been part of their inner circle but had still contributed to their work in crucial ways. Scholars, craftsmen, and even ordinary citizens had been drawn into their network through carefully managed contacts, each providing specialized knowledge or unique perspectives that enhanced the overall preservation effort. The conspiracy had been far larger than 13 individuals, encompassing a community of collaborators who had shared their vision of humanity's potential. As Brother Alduin's Rest absorbed these revelations, he began to understand the true nature of the challenge that Sister Valdris and her colleagues faced in the modern era. The 13's success had been so complete that the knowledge they had preserved now existed in quantities that exceeded any individual's ability to master. The temporal viewing chambers alone contained enough historical information to occupy teams of researchers for lifetimes, while the active laboratories continued to generate new insights at rates that threatened to overwhelm their designated guardians. The solution Sister Valdris proposed represented a fundamental shift in the way the conspiracy's inheritors approached their mission. Rather than maintaining the strict secrecy that had characterized the original 13's work, the modern network needed to begin identifying and training additional collaborators who could help manage the growing wealth of preserved knowledge. This meant accepting greater risks of exposure while creating opportunities for more widespread benefit from the ancient wisdom. Brother Alduin's Rest realized that his own recruitment represented part of this transition, a carefully calculated step toward expanding the network's capacity to fulfill its preservation mission. His background in archival work and his demonstrated commitment to scholarly integrity made him an ideal candidate for the delicate work of determining which knowledge could be safely revealed and which required continued protection. The decision to trust him with these secrets represented not merely recognition of his individual qualifications, but acceptance that the time had come for the conspiracy to evolve into something larger and more openly beneficial. The weight of this responsibility settled over him like a cloak woven from equal parts honor and obligation. To accept would mean dedicating his life to serving purposes that transcended personal achievement, becoming a guardian of humanity's heritage in ways that might never receive public recognition or appreciation. But to refuse would mean abandoning the greatest opportunity for scholarly service that any researcher could imagine, turning away from the chance to help shape the future development of human knowledge and achievement. As they prepared to leave Vulcan's extraordinary archive, Brother Alduin's Rest understood that he stood at a threshold that would define not merely his own future, but the future of the preservation network itself. The conspiracy of the 13 was preparing to emerge from the shadows where it had hidden for centuries, ready to begin a new phase of its mission that would require courage and wisdom in equal measure. The approach to Ortar's barrow carried them through landscapes where the very air seemed to thrum with barely contained energies, ancient magical currents that flowed like invisible rivers through valleys carved by forces beyond normal understanding. Here, in the high reaches where snow clung to peaks throughout the year, the 13 had established their most ambitious experiment in the preservation and development of mystical knowledge. Ortar the Mad, as history had remembered him, had been anything but insane in the conventional sense. His apparent madness had been a carefully cultivated disguise that allowed him to pursue research into magical territories so advanced that their very existence challenged contemporary understanding of what mortal minds could achieve. Sister Valdris moved through the protective ward surrounding Ortar's domain, with movements that seemed to dance in harmony with the flowing energies themselves, her gestures guiding Brother Alduin's rest through barriers that would have repelled or destroyed anyone lacking proper preparation. The defenses here were not merely obstacles but teaching tools, each layer requiring a deeper understanding of magical theory before passage became possible. As they ascended the final approaches to the barrow itself, Brother Alduin's rest felt his consciousness expanding to accommodate perceptions that his normal awareness could never have sustained. The structure that awaited them defied every conventional notion of what a barrow should be, rising from the mountainside like a crystalline growth that seemed to have emerged from the stone rather than being built upon it. Its surfaces caught and reflected light in patterns that hurt to observe directly, yet drew the eye with irresistible fascination toward geometries that suggested dimensions beyond the three that mortal senses normally perceived. The entrance shifted between states of solidity and energy, sometimes appearing as a doorway cut into living rock, other times manifesting as a portal of pure force that seemed to open directly onto spaces that existed outside normal reality. Entering Ortar's archive required a form of consciousness expansion that Sister Valdris guided with the expertise of long practice, teaching Brother Alduin's rest to allow his awareness to flow beyond the boundaries of individual identity while maintaining enough personal coherence to function as an observer and participant. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced, a dissolution of self that paradoxically led to greater understanding of both his own nature and the fundamental structures underlying all existence. Through this expanded awareness, the archive's contents became directly accessible to his consciousness rather than requiring the mediation of physical senses. The knowledge preserved within Ortar's domain existed in forms that transcended conventional storage methods, encoded directly into the fabric of space and time through techniques that transformed information into living energy. Magical principles became perceptible as flowing patterns of light and force, their interactions creating symphonies of power that could be experienced as pure understanding without requiring translation through words or symbols. Theoretical frameworks manifested as architectural structures through which consciousness could move, exploring their implications through direct encounter rather than abstract reasoning. At the heart of the archive lay Ortar's greatest achievement, a magical laboratory where the fundamental forces of creation themselves had been harnessed for the purpose of advancing human understanding. Here, in chambers that existed partially outside normal reality, the ancient dragon priest had conducted experiments that pushed the boundaries of what mortal magic could achieve. He had developed techniques for accessing power sources that did not depend on draconic blessing or daedric patronage, methods that allowed human practitioners to draw energy directly from the underlying structures of existence itself. The implications of these discoveries resonated through everything Brother Alduin's rest had learned about the conspiracy's goals and methods. If mortals could access magical power independently of external sources, then the 13's vision of human autonomy became not merely possible but inevitable. The knowledge preserved in Ortar's archive provided the tools necessary for humanity to stand as equals to any force in the universe, limited only by their own understanding and wisdom rather than by dependence on potentially unreliable allies or patrons. But the true scope of Ottar's achievement became apparent only as Brother Alduin's Rest began to explore the deeper levels of the archive, where research had continued automatically for centuries through magical systems so sophisticated that they operated as artificial intelligences in their own right. These constructs had been pursuing investigations that Ottar himself had only begun, following logical chains of inquiry through generations of accumulated understanding. They had developed magical techniques that surpassed anything the original 13 had imagined possible, creating tools and methods that could revolutionize every aspect of human civilization. The viewing of these ongoing experiments required careful preparation, as the energies involved operated on scales that could overwhelm unprepared consciousness. Sister Valdris guided Brother Alduin's Rest through meditation techniques that allowed him to observe safely while maintaining enough analytical detachment to understand what he was witnessing. Through this protected awareness, he watched as magical forces were shaped and directed with precision that made the most skilled contemporary wizards appear as fumbling amateurs by comparison. One set of experiments focused on the development of communication methods that could operate instantaneously across any distance, allowing scholars separated by continents to collaborate as easily as if they shared the same room. Another investigation had produced techniques for preserving organic matter in states of suspended animation so perfect that living beings could survive periods of centuries or even millennia without aging or deterioration. Most remarkably of all, certain research threads had begun to explore the possibility of transferring consciousness itself between different vessels, potentially offering forms of immortality that did not depend on undeath or other traditionally dangerous methods. The ethical implications of such capabilities weighed heavily on Brother Alduin's Rest's mind as he absorbed the full scope of what Ottar's research had made possible. The power to preserve consciousness across indefinite periods raised fundamental questions about the nature of identity and the responsibilities that came with such extended existence. The ability to communicate instantly across vast distances could transform civilization in ways that might prove as disruptive as they were beneficial. Even the relatively simple techniques for preserving organic matter carried implications that challenged basic assumptions about the relationship between life and death. Sister Valdris observed his reactions with the careful attention of one who had wrestled with these same questions for years. Her own understanding shaped by exposure to similar revelations throughout her career as a guardian of the 13's legacy. She spoke of the discussions that had occupied the modern network, as they had gradually discovered the full scope of what their predecessors had preserved, debates that echoed the ancient conspirators' own struggles with questions that had no easy answers. The power that Ottar had accessed and preserved was genuine, capable of transforming human civilization in ways that could bring unprecedented benefits or catastrophic dangers depending on how it was used. The network's responsibility extended beyond mere preservation to include careful evaluation of which techniques could be safely revealed and which required continued secrecy until humanity developed the wisdom necessary to use them properly. This meant accepting the burden of making decisions that could affect the course of history, choices that required not only technical understanding but profound moral insight. Brother Alduin's Rest began to understand why the modern inheritors of the 13's mission had expanded their recruitment efforts despite the risks such exposure entailed. The knowledge preserved in archives like Ottar's required not individual guardians, but entire communities of scholars working together to understand its implications and manage its gradual integration into contemporary civilization. No single person, regardless of their dedication or capability, could bear responsibility for decisions of such magnitude alone. The magical techniques themselves seem to recognize this need for distributed wisdom, responding differently to individual researchers than they did to collaborative groups working in harmony toward common goals. Power that might prove dangerous in the hands of a single practitioner became safe and beneficial when accessed by teams that could provide mutual guidance and restraint. The ancient systems had been designed to encourage cooperation rather than individual aggrandizement, ensuring that the most dangerous capabilities remained accessible only to those who had demonstrated the wisdom to use them responsibly. As they prepared to leave Otar's extraordinary archive, Brother Alduin's Rest felt the weight of magical potential settling into his consciousness, like seeds that would continue to grow and develop throughout his future studies. The knowledge he had gained here would take years to fully understand and integrate, requiring ongoing collaboration with other network members who could provide the specialized expertise necessary to unlock its full implications. The conspiracy of the 13 had preserved not merely information but capability, tools that could reshape the world if used with appropriate care and wisdom. The path ahead stretched into territories where ancient power waited patiently for minds capable of understanding its true nature and potential. Brother Alduin's Rest understood that he was no longer simply a scholar studying historical curiosities, but had become a practitioner of arts that could transform the fundamental conditions of human existence. The responsibility was overwhelming and exhilarating in equal measure, a calling that demanded nothing less than complete dedication to the service of knowledge and the welfare of all humanity. The sanctuary of Zakrisos the Serpent lay hidden within a mountain whose very existence seemed to shift between memory and reality, its peaks visible only to those who approached with the proper combination of knowledge and intent. Here, in caverns that had been carved not by water or wind, but by the patient application of will given form, the 13 had established their most secret gathering place, a neutral ground where conspirators from across Skyrim could meet without fear of discovery or interference. The journey to reach this hidden refuge had tested every skill Brother Alduin's Rest had developed during his exploration of the other archives, requiring him to navigate not only physical obstacles but barriers of perception and understanding that challenged his most fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality itself. Sister Valdris led him through approaches that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, paths that folded space around themselves, so that distances became meaningless and direction depended more on intention than on geography. The protective systems surrounding Zakrisos' domain operated on principles so advanced that they transformed the very experience of travel into a form of initiation, each step forward requiring deeper commitment to the goals and principles that had driven the original conspiracy. By the time they reached the final approaches to the sanctuary itself, Brother Alduin's Rest felt as though he had been traveling not merely through physical space, but through layers of accumulated wisdom and understanding. The entrance to the sanctuary appeared as a simple crack in the mountain face, so narrow that passage seemed impossible until one recognized it as another of the 13's elegant solutions to the problem of concealment. The opening existed in a state of dimensional flexibility, expanding to accommodate those who approached with proper authorization while remaining invisible to casual observation. As they passed through this portal, Brother Alduin's Rest experienced the sensation of being welcomed by the mountain itself, ancient stone recognizing his presence and adjusting its internal geometry to provide comfortable passage toward the chambers that lay hidden within its heart. The sanctuary's interior defied every expectation he had formed based on his experiences with the individual archives. Where those had been designed to preserve and develop specific types of knowledge, this space had been created to facilitate collaboration and synthesis, its chambers flowing together in patterns that encouraged the free exchange of ideas between visitors from diverse backgrounds and specializations. The architecture itself seemed to promote harmony and understanding, its curves and angles calculated to create acoustic environments where even whispered conversations could be clearly heard by all participants, while visual sightlines ensured that no one could feel excluded from the discussions taking place around them. At the heart of the sanctuary lay the Great Assembly Chamber, where the 13 had gathered for their most important deliberations. A circular space whose walls bore the accumulated memories of centuries of careful planning and profound decision-making. Brother Alduin's Rest could sense the presence of the ancient conspirators with an immediacy that transcended normal historical understanding, their discussions and debates echoing through temporal resonance chambers that preserved not merely their words but the emotional weight and intellectual passion that had driven their choices. The chamber responded to his presence by activating preserved conversations, allowing him to witness the evolution of the conspiracy's plans through direct observation of the meetings that had shaped their implementation. Through these temporal echoes, he observed the 13 wrestling with questions that had grown increasingly complex as their understanding of the forces they sought to influence had deepened. The early meetings had focused on relatively simple issues of knowledge preservation and distribution, but later gatherings had addressed challenges that touched on fundamental questions about the nature of progress, the responsibilities of power, and the ethical implications of intervening in the natural development of human civilization. The conspirators had evolved from mere preservationists into something approaching philosopher kings, their discussions revealing minds grappling with problems that had no clear precedents in recorded history. Sister Valdres guided him to observation points where he could witness specific conversations that had proven crucial to the conspiracy's development. Meetings where individual insights had combined to produce breakthrough understanding that transformed their entire approach to their mission. He watched as Canaric's practical expertise merged with Azidal's theoretical frameworks, creating implementation strategies that were both intellectually sophisticated and operationally feasible. He observed Vokun's temporal perspectives combining with Otar's magical innovations to produce preservation techniques that operated across multiple dimensions of existence simultaneously. But perhaps most remarkable were the sessions where the 13 had grappled with questions about the long-term implications of their work, discussions that revealed their awareness that their actions would influence the development of human civilization for millennia to come. They had understood that knowledge, once released into the world, would take on life of its own, evolving and developing in ways that its original preservers could not fully predict or control. This recognition had led to increasingly sophisticated discussions about the responsibilities inherent in their role as guardians of human potential. The viewing of these ancient deliberations provided Brother Alduin's Rest with insights into the personalities and perspectives that had shaped the conspiracy's character, revealing the 13 not as remote historical figures, but as individuals whose concerns and motivations resonated strongly with contemporary challenges. Zacharias himself emerged as a master synthesizer, capable of identifying connections between seemingly disparate ideas and weaving them together into coherent frameworks that advanced the group's understanding. His contributions to their discussions demonstrated the particular genius that had earned him his place among the conspiracy's leadership, a talent for seeing patterns and relationships that others missed. The sanctuary also contained extensive archives documenting the recruitment and training of the network members who had carried forward the 13's mission across the centuries since their deaths. These records revealed a selection process so careful and thorough that it resembled the cultivation of rare plants more than conventional hiring practices. Potential candidates were observed for years before being approached, their character and capabilities assessed through scenarios that tested not only their intellectual qualifications but their emotional maturity and ethical development. Only those who demonstrated the rare combination of scholarly excellence, personal integrity, and deep commitment to human welfare were invited to join the network's ranks. Brother Alduin's Rest found records of his own evaluation process, documentation that revealed the careful attention Sister Valdres and her colleagues had paid to his development long before they had made formal contact. His responses to the various challenges and mysteries he had encountered during his early investigations had all been observed and analyzed, his reactions providing evidence of the qualities that made him suitable for recruitment into the conspiracy's modern continuation. The thoroughness of this preparation filled him with both gratitude for the care that had been taken and humility about the trust that was being placed in him. The Assembly Chamber's deeper archives contained strategic planning documents that outlined the network's goals and methods for the centuries ahead. plans that revealed the scope and ambition of their continuing mission. The modern inheritors of the 13's legacy faced challenges that their predecessors could hardly have imagined, problems arising not from the need to preserve knowledge, but from the complexities of managing its gradual revelation and integration into rapidly changing social structures. The network's leadership had developed sophisticated models for predicting the long-term consequences of releasing specific types of information, using analytical frameworks that combined historical precedent with advanced theoretical understanding. These planning documents revealed that Brother Alduin's Rest's recruitment was part of a larger expansion effort designed to prepare the network for a new phase of its operations. The time of strict secrecy was drawing to a close, replaced by a more active approach that would involve carefully managed revelation of selected knowledge to broader scholarly communities. This transition required additional personnel with the specialized skills necessary to serve as intermediaries between the hidden archives and the public institutions that could benefit from their contents. The responsibility inherent in this new approach weighed heavily on Brother Alduin's Rest's consciousness as he absorbed the full implications of what he was being asked to undertake. The knowledge preserved by the 13 was not merely historically interesting, but actively powerful, capable of transforming every aspect of human civilization if properly applied. The network's members would serve as gatekeepers and guides, helping to ensure that this gradual transformation proceeded in ways that maximized benefit while minimizing the risks of disruption or misuse. Sister Valdra spoke of the careful balance that would be required in the years ahead, the need to reveal enough knowledge to advance human development while maintaining sufficient concealment to protect both the archives and the broader world from those who might seek to exploit ancient wisdom for destructive purposes. This would require not only technical expertise but political sophistication, the ability to work within existing institutions while subtly influencing their development toward more enlightened perspectives and practices. The Assembly Chamber's final revelation came in the form of a preserved message from the 13 themselves, a communication directed specifically toward future generations who would inherit their mission. The message acknowledged the challenges that their successors would face while expressing confidence in their ability to adapt the original vision to meet changing circumstances. The conspirators had understood that their work would necessarily evolve beyond anything they could predict, but they had faith that the principles underlying their efforts would provide adequate guidance for whatever decisions future guardians might need to make. As Brother Alduin's Rest prepared to leave the sanctuary that had served as the conspiracy's heart for so many centuries, he carried with him not only knowledge but purpose, a clear understanding of his role in a story that stretched from the ancient past toward an uncertain but promising future. The convergence of all his discoveries in this sacred space had transformed him from a curious scholar into a dedicated guardian, ready to take his place in the network that would guide humanity's development through the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. The quiet revolution that had begun with 13 dragon priests gathering in hidden chambers was preparing to enter a new phase, one that would test their successors' wisdom and dedication in ways that would determine the future course of human civilization itself. The final archive awaited them in a location that seemed to exist at the intersection of all the paths they had traveled, a convergence point where the individual efforts of the 13 merged into a unified whole that transcended the sum of its parts. Mirik's sanctuary, hidden beneath the waves of a lake whose waters reflected not the sky above, but visions of possibilities yet to be realized, represented the conspiracy's ultimate achievement in both preservation and transformation. Here, in chambers that existed simultaneously in the physical world and in dimensions of pure thought, the first Dragonborn had created something that challenged every assumption about the relationship between power and wisdom, between individual achievement and collective benefit. The approach to Mirak's domain required not physical travel but a form of consciousness expansion that Sister Valdris had spent weeks preparing Brother Alduin's rest to undertake safely. The techniques involved represented the culmination of everything he had learned in the previous archives, requiring him to integrate knowledge from all the specialized areas the 13 had developed, while maintaining enough personal coherence to function as an effective observer and participant. The sensation was unlike anything he had experienced before, a dissolution of individual boundaries that paradoxically led to greater clarity about his own role in the vast patterns of existence. The sanctuary itself defied conventional description, existing as a space where thought became environment and intention shaped reality, according to principles that operated beyond normal physical constraints. Chambers flowed into each other according to the needs of their occupants, while archives organized themselves around the questions being asked, rather than following predetermined organizational schemes. Knowledge existed here not as stored information, but as living understanding, accessible through direct mental contact, rather than requiring the mediation of written or spoken words. At the heart of this extraordinary space lay Mirak's greatest contribution to the conspiracy's mission, a synthesis of all the preserved knowledge that transformed individual discoveries into a coherent framework for understanding the fundamental nature of existence itself. Through centuries of careful integration and development, the various specialized areas of research had been woven together into a unified theory that provided answers to questions that had puzzled philosophers and scholars throughout recorded history. The nature of consciousness, the relationship between individual and universal awareness, the mechanisms by which thought influenced reality, all had been explored and explained through frameworks that made previously incomprehensible phenomena accessible to mortal understanding. Brother Alduin's rest found himself able to access this integrated knowledge directly, his consciousness merging temporarily with the vast repository of accumulated wisdom that Mirak had created. Through this connection, he experienced understanding that went far beyond mere intellectual comprehension, gaining insights that transformed his perception of everything he had learned during his journey through the other archives. The individual discoveries that had seemed remarkable in isolation revealed themselves as parts of an intricate pattern whose full beauty and significance could only be appreciated when viewed as a complete system. The implications of this unified understanding resonated through every aspect of the conspiracy's original mission, revealing dimensions of their achievement that had remained hidden even from most of the network's modern inheritors. The 13 had not merely preserved knowledge for future generations, but had actually created tools for accelerating human development that could compress centuries of natural progress into decades or even years. The techniques they had developed, when properly understood and applied, could transform individual consciousness and collective civilization in ways that would make their current achievements appear primitive by comparison. But with this enhanced understanding came recognition of the enormous responsibilities that accompanied such transformative capability. Mirak's integrated framework provided not only the means for advancing human development, but also clear analysis of the dangers inherent in accelerated progress. Civilizations that developed too rapidly risked losing the wisdom that came from lived experience, while individuals who gained power without corresponding growth in understanding could become dangers to themselves and others. The conspiracy's modern inheritors faced the challenge of managing these risks while still allowing humanity to benefit from the tools their predecessors had created. Sister Valdris revealed that Brother Alduin's rest's recruitment and training had been designed to prepare him for a specific role in addressing these challenges, a position that would require him to serve as both guardian and guide for others who would need similar access to the integrated knowledge that Mirak had preserved. The network's expansion was not merely about increasing their numbers, but about creating a new type of scholar-educator, individuals capable of helping others navigate the transformative processes that exposure to advanced knowledge could trigger. The selection process that had identified him as suitable for this role had evaluated not only his scholarly capabilities, but his emotional stability and ethical development, ensuring that he possessed the personal qualities necessary to handle the responsibilities involved. The network's leaders had learned through careful observation that technical competence alone was insufficient preparation for work with knowledge powerful enough to reshape consciousness itself. Only those who had demonstrated genuine wisdom and deep compassion for humanity's welfare could be trusted with such transformative capabilities. The training that followed his recruitment would be unlike anything offered in conventional educational institutions, involving direct consciousness expansion techniques that allowed accelerated integration of vast amounts of information while maintaining psychological stability and ethical orientation. Brother Alduin's Rest would learn to access not only the preserved knowledge of the 13, but the ongoing research that continued to develop within their archives, becoming capable of contributing to investigations that operated on timescales measured in centuries rather than years. But perhaps most importantly, he would develop the specialized skills necessary to identify and prepare others for similar transformative experiences, ensuring that the network's expansion could continue safely despite the risks inherent in working with knowledge of such power and scope. This meant learning to recognize the subtle signs that indicated readiness for advancement, while also understanding the warning signals that suggested someone should not be exposed to potentially overwhelming information. The process of accepting these responsibilities required Brother Alduin's Rest to make choices that would define not only his own future, but the future development of the network itself. The role being offered to him represented a position of significant influence within an organization whose activities could shape the course of human civilization for generations to come. To accept would mean dedicating his life entirely to service that might never receive public recognition, working behind the scenes to guide development processes whose success would be measured in centuries rather than immediate results. The decision, when it came to him, felt less like choosing between alternatives than like recognizing a path that had been waiting for him throughout his entire life. Every experience he had undergone, from his earliest childhood fascination with ancient texts to his recent discoveries in the hidden archives, had been preparing him for this moment of commitment. The conspiracy of the 13 had reached across the centuries to claim him not through coercion, but through the irresistible attraction of purpose that aligned perfectly with his deepest aspirations and capabilities. As he accepted the role that Sister Valdris and the network offered, Brother Alduin's Rest felt the presence of the ancient conspirators themselves, their approval flowing through the temporal connections that linked past and future in chains of continuity that transcended individual mortality. He understood that he was not merely joining an organization, but was becoming part of a tradition that embodied humanity's highest aspirations for wisdom, knowledge, and beneficial progress toward ever greater understanding of existence itself. The gentle resolution that settled over him carried the peace that came from finding his true calling, the recognition that his life had meaning and purpose that extended far beyond personal achievement or satisfaction. He had become a guardian of humanity's future, a keeper of knowledge that could transform the world, and a guide for others who would follow similar paths toward the same profound understanding and commitment. The conspiracy of the 13 had achieved its ultimate victory, not through force or manipulation, but through the quiet power of wisdom offered freely to those capable of receiving and using it responsibly. Their legacy would continue through individuals like Brother Alduin's Rest, who would carry forward their mission of preservation and gradual revelation, ensuring that humanity's development proceeded with the careful guidance that such transformative knowledge required. The months that followed Brother Alduin's Rest's formal induction into the network passed like pages turning in a manuscript whose contents revealed themselves gradually, each day bringing deeper understanding of the responsibilities he had accepted and the community he had joined. His return to the temple at Solitude had required careful adjustment, as he now moved through familiar spaces while carrying knowledge that transformed his perception of everything around him. The simple routines of archival work that had once defined his existence now served as both cover and preparation for activities whose true significance extended far beyond the boundaries of conventional scholarship. Sister Valdres had remained at the temple as his mentor and guide, though her presence was carefully managed to avoid drawing attention to the changes in his status and responsibilities. To outside observers, she appeared to be conducting routine collaborative research into ancient religious practices, a scholarly exchange between institutions that aroused no suspicion among those who were not prepared to perceive the deeper currents of knowledge preservation that flowed beneath such mundane activities. Their actual work together involved intensive training in techniques that prepared him to access and integrate information from sources that existed beyond normal physical reality. The integration process itself proved to be more challenging than Brother Alduin's rest had anticipated, requiring him to develop new modes of consciousness that could operate simultaneously across multiple levels of awareness without losing coherence or stability. The knowledge preserved by the 13 did not exist in forms that could simply be memorized like conventional texts, but rather as living systems of understanding that required ongoing relationship and interaction. Learning to work with such dynamic information meant developing capabilities that transformed not only his intellectual capacity, but his entire approach to perception and reasoning. His colleagues at the temple began to notice subtle changes in his scholarly work, improvements in both insight and productivity that exceeded what gradual experience would normally produce. His interpretations of historical documents now included perspectives that revealed previously unnoticed connections and patterns, while his ability to locate relevant materials seemed to operate with uncanny precision. When questioned about these enhancements, he attributed them to techniques learned from Sister Valdres's research methods, explanations that satisfied curiosity without revealing the true nature of his expanded capabilities. The network's modern operations, as he gradually learned to perceive and participate in them, represented an evolution of the original conspiracy's methods that adapted ancient principles to contemporary circumstances. Where the 13 had worked in isolation enforced by the political realities of their time, their modern inheritors operated through carefully constructed webs of collaboration that spanned academic institutions, government agencies, merchant guilds, and religious organizations throughout Tamriel and beyond. The network's influence flowed through channels so subtle that even its beneficiaries rarely recognized the true source of the guidance they received. Brother Alduin's rest's role within this vast operation involved serving as both researcher and educator, identifying promising candidates for recruitment while simultaneously working to advance specific aspects of knowledge preservation and development. His position at the temple provided ideal cover for both functions, as his responsibilities naturally brought him into contact with scholars, officials, and other individuals whose work could benefit from careful guidance toward greater understanding of the principles underlying human progress and development. The selection criteria for potential network members had evolved considerably since the 13's time, adapting to changes in social structure and educational opportunity that made different types of individuals available for recruitment. Where the original conspirators had necessarily drawn from the limited pool of those with formal education and institutional access, the modern network could identify talent from much broader segments of society. Merchants whose travels exposed them to diverse perspectives, craftsmen whose work required deep understanding of natural principles, even farmers whose practical experience provided insights into ecological relationships that complemented more theoretical approaches to knowledge. The training programs that prepared new recruits for network membership represented sophisticated syntheses of educational techniques that drew from all the specialized areas the 13 had developed. Candidates learned not only specific information, but methods for accessing and integrating knowledge that existed in forms beyond conventional understanding. They developed capabilities for recognizing patterns and connections that operated across multiple disciplines simultaneously, while also acquiring the wisdom necessary to use such enhanced perception responsibly. Brother Alduin's Rest found himself particularly suited to working with candidates who had backgrounds similar to his own, individuals whose scholarly training provided foundation for the advanced techniques the network employed, while their temperament suggested capacity for the long-term commitment that effective membership required. His first successful recruitment involved a young scribe from Windhelm, whose curiosity about inconsistencies in official records had led her to discoveries that paralleled his own early investigations into the 13's activities. The process of guiding new members through their initial exposure to network operations required delicate balance between revelation and protection, ensuring that they gained enough understanding to function effectively while avoiding the overwhelming experiences that could result from too rapid advancement. Brother Alduin's Rest learned to recognize the subtle signs that indicated readiness for each stage of development, adjusting his approach to match the specific needs and capabilities of individual candidates. The network's ongoing research activities continued to advance understanding in areas that the 13 had identified as crucial for humanity's long-term development. New discoveries built upon ancient foundations while extending into territories that the original conspirators had only begun to explore. Advances in communication techniques now allowed near instantaneous collaboration between researchers separated by vast distances, while improvements in preservation methods ensured that knowledge would survive even catastrophic disruptions to normal social structures. Perhaps most significantly, the network had begun developing implementation strategies for gradually introducing preserved knowledge into broader society through mechanisms that avoided the disruption and conflict that sudden revelations might provoke. These programs operated through existing institutions and social structures, carefully designed to appear as natural developments rather than externally imposed changes. Educational reforms that improved access to advanced learning, technological innovations that enhanced productivity and quality of life, even political developments that promoted more enlightened approaches to governance, all reflected the network's influence operating through channels that maintained plausible deniability. Brother Alduin's Rest's growing involvement in these activities provided him with perspectives on human civilization's development that few individuals had ever possessed. Understanding that revealed both the remarkable progress that had been achieved and the vast potential that remained to be realized. The network's archives contained detailed analyses of historical patterns that showed how previous societies had succeeded or failed in managing transitions between different levels of technological and social sophistication, providing guidance for avoiding mistakes that had led to collapse or stagnation in earlier civilizations. The emotional weight of such comprehensive understanding required ongoing support from colleagues who had undergone similar transformative experiences, creating bonds of shared purpose and mutual assistance that transcended conventional professional relationships. The network functioned as a community of scholars whose dedication to their mission created connections deeper than those found in ordinary academic or religious institutions. Members supported each other not only in their specific work assignments, but in managing the psychological challenges that came with carrying responsibilities of such scope and significance. As winter settled over the temple like a blanket of contemplative silence, Brother Alduin's Rest reflected on the year's transformations with a sense of quiet satisfaction that came from discovering his true calling. The conspiracy of the 13 had claimed him not through dramatic revelation, but through gradual recognition of purposes and capabilities that had always been present, but had required proper circumstances to manifest fully. His life had gained meaning and direction that extended far beyond personal achievement, connecting him to endeavors that would continue long after his individual contribution had ended. The peaceful aftermath of his recruitment had brought not the conclusion of one story, but the beginning of another, a narrative that would unfold across decades of dedicated service to goals that represented humanity's highest aspirations for wisdom, knowledge, and beneficial progress toward greater understanding. The ancient conspiracy continued its patient work through individuals like himself, ensuring that the torch of accumulated wisdom would be passed safely from generation to generation until all humanity could benefit from the treasures that careful preservation had protected through the centuries of shadow and secrecy. The deep winter months brought Brother Alduin's rest into the most profound phase of his transformation, a period when the full scope of the 13's achievement began to reveal itself through direct experience rather than mere intellectual understanding. The network's inner archives, accessible only to those who had demonstrated both capability and commitment sufficient for the deepest levels of trust, contained knowledge that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality itself. Here, in repositories that existed as much in dimensions of consciousness as in physical space, the culmination of centuries of research and development waited for minds prepared to grasp implications that extended far beyond conventional scholarly investigation. Sister Valdris guided him through access protocols that required not only technical skill, but a form of ethical purification that ensured he approached such powerful knowledge with appropriate reverence and responsibility. The process involved meditation techniques that had evolved from practices originally developed by Vulcan and Mirak, methods for expanding awareness while maintaining the personal stability necessary to function effectively in roles that required interaction with ordinary society. Through weeks of careful preparation, Brother Alduin's rest learned to navigate states of consciousness that allowed him to perceive patterns and relationships operating across multiple levels of existence simultaneously. The revelations that emerged from this expanded awareness transformed his understanding of the conspiracy's true nature and ultimate purpose. The 13 had not merely been preserving human knowledge and culture, but had actually been preparing humanity for evolutionary transition to fundamentally different modes of existence and capability. Their research into magical techniques, technological innovations, and consciousness expansion had all been directed toward creating tools that could accelerate human development beyond the limitations imposed by current biological and social structures. The preserved documents from this deepest level of the archive spoke of goals that seemed almost mythological in scope, visions of human civilization that had transcended every constraint that currently defined the boundaries of mortal achievement. The 13 had envisioned societies where individual consciousness could merge temporarily with collective awareness without losing personal identity, communities where material needs were met through direct manipulation of elemental forces, and institutions where decision-making proceeded through access to information and wisdom that spanned both temporal and spatial dimensions normally beyond human perception. But these were not mere fantasies or theoretical speculation. The archives contained detailed technical documentation for methods that could actually produce such transformations, techniques that built upon the specialized knowledge each member of the 13 had developed in their individual areas of expertise. Konarik's military innovations had evolved into strategies for protecting advancing civilizations from forces that might seek to prevent or reverse their development. Azadal's scholarly methods had produced educational techniques capable of accelerating individual learning to rates that could compress lifetimes of normal study into periods measured in months or years. Vulcan's temporal manipulations had created tools for accessing information from potential futures, allowing communities to evaluate the long-term consequences of current decisions before committing to courses of action. Otara's magical research had developed power sources that could supply the energy requirements for civilizations whose technological capabilities exceeded anything currently imaginable. Each area of specialized knowledge contributed essential elements to an integrated approach that could transform human existence in ways that addressed every limitation that currently constrained development and achievement. The implications of such comprehensive transformation capabilities weighed heavily on Brother Alduin's Rest's consciousness as he absorbed the full scope of what the network had inherited from its ancient founders. The power to reshape human civilization existed not as distant possibility, but as immediately available capability, limited only by the wisdom and caution of those who controlled access to the necessary techniques. The responsibility inherent in such stewardship exceeded anything that ordinary ethical frameworks were designed to address, requiring moral reasoning that operated on scales normally associated with divine rather than mortal decision-making. Sister Valdris revealed that the network's current leadership had been grappling with these responsibilities for generations, developing increasingly sophisticated approaches to managing the gradual introduction of transformative capabilities without triggering the social chaos that sudden change might provoke. The historical analyses preserved in the deepest archives showed how previous civilizations had handled similar transitions, providing both positive examples of successful advancement and cautionary tales of societies that had collapsed under the weight of changes they were not prepared to integrate safely. The modern network strategy involved careful cultivation of conditions that would make humanity ready for accelerated development, working through multiple channels to promote the psychological, social, and spiritual preparation necessary for managing transformation without losing essential human characteristics. Educational initiatives that enhanced critical thinking and ethical reasoning, cultural programs that expanded appreciation for diversity and cooperation, even political movements that promoted more enlightened approaches to governance, all contributed to creating foundations upon which advanced capabilities could be built safely. Brother Alduin's Rest's role within this vast undertaking involved serving as both researcher and implementer, working to identify specific areas where limited introduction of advanced techniques could produce benefits that prepared the ground for more comprehensive changes. His position at the temple provided ideal cover for activities that seemed to involve conventional scholarly research while actually advancing much more ambitious goals. His growing network of contacts throughout Skyrim's academic and religious institutions created opportunities for influencing development in ways that appeared to arise from natural social processes. The selection of specific techniques for gradual revelation required analysis that combined technical understanding with profound insight into human psychology and social dynamics. Knowledge that could enhance individual capabilities needed to be introduced in ways that promoted cooperation rather than competition, while innovations that increased material prosperity had to be managed to ensure equitable distribution rather than concentration among existing elites. The network's members had to function as both scholars and social engineers, designing implementation strategies that maximized benefits while minimizing risks of disruption or misuse. The deeper levels of the archives also contained preserved communications from the 13 themselves, messages directed toward future generations who would inherit responsibility for their mission. These documents revealed the ancient conspirators' awareness that their work would necessarily evolve beyond anything they could predict or control, adapting to circumstances and opportunities they could not anticipate. But they had confidence that the principles underlying their efforts would provide adequate guidance for whatever decisions their successors might need to make. The ethical frameworks they had developed for evaluating the use of transformative knowledge emphasized service to humanity's long-term welfare over short-term benefits, requiring network members to consider consequences that might not become apparent for generations. They had understood that the power to reshape civilization carried obligations that extended far beyond the immediate effects of any specific intervention, creating responsibilities toward both current and future generations that had to be balanced carefully in every decision. Brother Alduin's Rest found himself particularly drawn to the 13's discussions of the relationship between individual achievement and collective benefit. Debates that had shaped their approach to managing the enormous capabilities their research had produced. They had recognized that transformation imposed from above, regardless of how benevolent its intentions, could never produce the authentic development that arose from communities that had earned their advancement through genuine growth in wisdom and understanding. This insight had led them to develop methods that empowered others to achieve transformation through their own efforts, rather than simply providing advanced capabilities without corresponding preparation. The techniques they had created functioned as tools that enhanced human potential rather than replacing human agency, ensuring that those who benefited from their innovations gained not only greater capability, but also the wisdom necessary to use such enhancement responsibly. As the winter months deepened into the profound silence that settled over the northern reaches of Skyrim, Brother Alduin's Rest understood that his journey into the heart of the 13's legacy had transformed him from a curious scholar into something approaching a guardian of humanity's future. The quiet revelations that had emerged from the deepest archives carried implications that would shape his understanding and guide his actions for all the years that lay ahead. The conspiracy that had begun with 13 dragon priests gathering in secret chambers had evolved into a tradition of service that offered hope for humanity's advancement toward achievements that could hardly be imagined by those who remained bound by current limitations and constraints. The ancient whispers that had first drawn him into this mystery had become a chorus of wisdom that would accompany him throughout whatever contributions he might make to the great work that continued still, patient and persistent as the turning of seasons, eternal as the love that had motivated its founders to risk everything for the sake of preserving and advancing the treasures of human achievement and potential. The first spring rains that brought new life to the ancient valleys of Skyrim also awakened Brother Alduin's Rest to the profound reality of his transformation from curious scholar to active guardian of humanity's most precious legacy. As he walked the familiar paths around the temple at Solitude, watching the morning mist rise from valleys that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, he carried within his consciousness knowledge that spanned millennia and touched upon possibilities that extended far into the future. The conspiracy of the 13 had claimed him completely, not through force or manipulation, but through the irresistible attraction of purpose that aligned perfectly with his deepest nature and highest aspirations. His work at the temple continued to provide the perfect foundation for activities whose true scope remained invisible to casual observation. The daily routines of archival maintenance and scholarly research now served as both genuine contributions to conventional learning and carefully constructed covers for interventions that operated on scales far beyond what ordinary academic work could achieve. Every manuscript he catalogued, every historical analysis he prepared, every conversation he had with visiting scholars contributed to a vast pattern of influence that shaped the development of understanding throughout the academic institutions of Tamriel. The network's operations had expanded significantly during the months since his recruitment, adding new members whose diverse backgrounds and specialized capabilities enhanced the organization's capacity to address the complex challenges involved in managing humanity's gradual advancement. Brother Alduin's Rest had played a direct role in several of these recruitments, identifying candidates whose combinations of scholarly excellence, ethical integrity, and emotional stability made them suitable for the responsibilities that network membership entailed. Each successful addition to their ranks represented not merely numerical growth, but qualitative enhancement of their collective capabilities. His first major independent project involved establishing a new archive facility hidden beneath the ruins of an ancient Nordic temple that had been abandoned for centuries, but whose location provided ideal access to several major trade routes. The technical challenges of creating spaces that could preserve knowledge across indefinite periods while remaining completely invisible to casual observation required application of techniques that drew from all the specialized areas the 13 had developed. The construction process itself became a form of advanced education, teaching him to integrate theoretical understanding with practical implementation in ways that prepared him for increasingly complex assignments. The archive he created followed design principles that had evolved considerably since the 13's original facilities, incorporating innovations that improved both security and accessibility while maintaining the essential characteristics that made such preservation possible. The chambers existed partially outside normal physical reality, their internal dimensions expanding or contracting according to need, while their external appearance remained that of unremarkable ruins that aroused no curiosity from travelers or local inhabitants. The preservation systems operated through direct manipulation of temporal flows, ensuring that materials stored within would survive unchanged regardless of what catastrophes might affect the surrounding environment. But the true innovation in his archive design involved its capacity for active knowledge development rather than mere static preservation. Following principles derived from Mirek's most advanced work, the facility could continue research that had been initiated by its users, pursuing investigations through automated processes that operated across timescales measured in decades or centuries. Questions left unresolved by one generation of scholars could be developed by subsequent researchers who might not appear until the original investigators had been dead for years or generations. The first materials he stored in this new facility included copies of crucial documents from the 13's archives combined with contemporary research that extended their investigations into areas the ancient conspirators had only begun to explore. Modern understanding of magical theory, advances in craftsmanship and technology, even philosophical developments that had emerged from contact between different cultures all contributed to a growing body of knowledge that built upon ancient foundations while addressing contemporary concerns and challenges. His recruitment activities had led to the identification of several particularly promising candidates, individuals whose backgrounds and capabilities suggested potential for advancement to the highest levels of network responsibility. A young mage in Winterhold whose research into the nature of consciousness had produced insights that paralleled Ottar's most advanced discoveries. A master craftsman in Riften whose innovations in metallurgy were beginning to approach techniques that Conaric had developed centuries earlier. A merchant from Whiterun whose travels had exposed her to information about ancient sites and hidden knowledge that suggested natural aptitude for the kind of investigation that network membership required. Each potential recruit required careful evaluation and gradual preparation that could extend across years of subtle contact and gentle guidance. Brother Alduin's Rest learned to recognize the indicators that suggested readiness for more direct approach while also developing sensitivity to warning signs that advised caution or postponement. The network's expansion had to proceed at rates that allowed for proper integration and training, while avoiding the exposure that might result from attempting to grow too rapidly. The broader implications of the network's activities became increasingly apparent as Brother Alduin's Rest gained access to progress reports from colleagues working in other regions and specialized areas. The cumulative effect of their interventions was producing changes in the development of human civilization that, while subtle enough to appear as natural evolution, actually represented acceleration toward the transformative goals that the 13 had envisioned. Educational opportunities were expanding in ways that promoted the critical thinking and ethical reasoning necessary for managing advanced capabilities. Technological innovations were appearing that laid groundwork for more dramatic developments that could be introduced when society was prepared to integrate them safely. Perhaps most significantly, the network's cultural influence was gradually shifting attitudes and values in directions that would support the cooperative approaches necessary for successful civilization advancement. Competition and conflict, while not eliminated entirely, were being supplemented by growing appreciation for collaboration and mutual assistance. Individual achievement remained important, but increasingly within frameworks that emphasize service to collective welfare rather than purely personal aggrandizement. The monitoring systems that tracked these developments operated through information networks that spanned continents and drew from sources that included everything from official government reports to private correspondence between merchants, scholars, and travelers. The analysis of such comprehensive data required techniques that combined conventional scholarly methods with the advanced pattern recognition capabilities that network training made possible. Brother Alduin's Rest found himself contributing to assessments that influenced strategic decisions affecting the long-term development of entire regions and populations. His role in these activities provided perspectives on human civilization's trajectory that few individuals in history had ever possessed. The network's archives contain detailed analyses of social, technological, and cultural development patterns that revealed both the remarkable progress humanity had achieved and the vast potential that remained to be realized. The transformation capabilities preserved by the 13 represented tools for accelerating this development in ways that could compress centuries of natural progress into periods measured in decades or years. But with such comprehensive understanding came recognition of the enormous responsibility that network membership entailed. Every intervention, regardless of how carefully planned and skillfully implemented, carried consequences that rippled outward through space and time in ways that could affect countless lives. The ethical frameworks developed by the 13 provided guidance for evaluating such complex moral terrain. But ultimately, each network member had to develop personal wisdom sufficient for making decisions whose implications might not become apparent for generations. The seasonal cycle that brought spring to Skyrim also marked the completion of Brother Alduin's Rest's first year as a full network member, a period that had transformed him from enthusiastic recruit to experienced operative capable of independent responsibility for significant projects and decisions. His archive facility was now operational and beginning to attract the attention of other network members who could benefit from its unique capabilities. His recruitment activities had identified several candidates who showed promise for eventual advancement to full membership. His contributions to the network's analytical work had earned recognition from senior colleagues who had decades of experience in similar activities. But perhaps most importantly, he had developed the personal equilibrium necessary for carrying the psychological burdens that came with knowledge of humanity's true potential and the means for realizing it. The weight of such understanding had initially seemed overwhelming, but gradually he had learned to find peace in the recognition that his individual contribution was part of a vast collective effort that would continue long after his personal involvement had ended. The gentle legacy that the 13 had created would persist through the dedication of individuals like himself, each adding their unique capabilities to a tradition that embodied humanity's highest aspirations for wisdom, knowledge, and beneficial progress toward greater understanding. The conspiracy that had begun in hidden chambers beneath ancient temples had evolved into something far more comprehensive and enduring than its founders had dared to hope. Their vision of preserved knowledge, serving humanity's long-term welfare, had become reality through the patient work of generations of dedicated guardians who had kept faith with principles that transcended individual mortality. The legacy they had created would continue to grow and develop, adapting to new challenges and opportunities while maintaining the essential character that made it a force for enlightenment and advancement in a world that still struggled with the limitations of its current understanding and capabilities. The summer solstice brought Brother Alduin's Rest to a hilltop overlooking the valley where his journey into the conspiracy's mysteries had begun, a vantage point that allowed him to perceive the landscape with eyes transformed by knowledge that had reshaped his understanding of everything the view contained. The temple at Solitude appeared small and peaceful in the distance, its towers catching the golden light of evening in ways that reminded him of the first manuscript he had discovered on that rain-swept night that seemed both yesterday and lifetimes ago. The scholar who had stumbled upon forbidden documents by accident had evolved into a guardian who carried responsibility for preserving and advancing humanity's most precious heritage. Sister Valdris sat beside him in comfortable silence, Her presence a reminder of the guidance that had shaped his transformation from curious researcher into dedicated network member. The months of training and gradual revelation had created bonds between them that transcended ordinary mentor-student relationships, connecting them through shared commitment to goals that extended far beyond personal achievement or recognition. Their work together had contributed to the network's expansion and development in ways that would influence its activities for years to come, adding new capabilities and perspectives that enhanced the organization's capacity to serve its ancient mission. The portfolio of projects that Brother Alduin's Rest had completed during his first year of full membership represented contributions to the network's activities that spanned the entire range of its responsibilities. His archive facility was now operational and beginning to serve researchers from across Tamriel who had been carefully prepared for access to the advanced techniques it made available. The recruitment program he had developed was producing candidates whose qualifications suggested potential for advancement to positions of significant responsibility within the organization. His analytical work had contributed to strategic assessments that influenced network policies affecting large-scale development initiatives. But perhaps most significantly, he had begun to develop the wisdom necessary for making independent judgments about the complex ethical questions that network membership inevitably involved. The frameworks provided by the 13's legacy offered guidance for navigating moral terrain that conventional ethical systems were never designed to address, but ultimately each member had to cultivate personal understanding sufficient for decisions whose consequences might not become apparent for generations. His growing confidence in his ability to balance immediate benefits against long-term risks represented maturation that prepared him for advancement to higher levels of responsibility and trust. The view from the hilltop also encompassed several locations where other network members were conducting activities whose cumulative effect was gradually advancing human civilization toward the transformative goals that the conspiracy had established centuries earlier. A farming community in the valley below was experimenting with agricultural techniques that had been carefully adapted from Canaric's preserved research, producing increases in productivity that would improve nutrition and free labor for other developmental activities. A mining operation visible in the foothills was employing metallurgical innovations derived from Arzadal's work, creating materials whose superior properties would enable construction projects that were currently beyond technological reach. The network's influence flowed through channels so subtle that even its beneficiaries rarely recognized the true source of the guidance they received. Yet the cumulative effect was producing changes that accelerated human development in ways that appeared to result from natural social evolution. Educational opportunities were expanding through mechanisms that promoted critical thinking and ethical reasoning while maintaining compatibility with existing institutional structures. Technological innovations were appearing at rates that pushed the boundaries of current capabilities while avoiding the disruption that sudden revolutionary changes might provoke. Sister Valdris spoke of the satisfaction that came from witnessing the gradual fruition of efforts that had required patience and dedication measured in years rather than months. Progress that vindicated the 13's faith in humanity's capacity for beneficial development when provided with appropriate guidance and support. The ancient conspirators had understood that lasting transformation had to emerge from genuine growth in wisdom and understanding rather than being imposed through external intervention, regardless of how benevolent such interference might be intended to be. The techniques they had developed functioned as tools that enhanced human potential rather than replacing human agency, ensuring that communities that benefited from network influence gained not only greater capabilities but also the maturity necessary to use such enhancement responsibly. This approach required patience that operated on generational timescales, but it produced results that were both more stable and more authentic than anything that could be achieved through direct application of the advanced techniques the archives contained. Brother Alduin's Rest reflected on the personal journey that had brought him from the simple life of temple scholarship to his current role as guardian of humanity's future. recognizing that each stage of his development had prepared him for responsibilities that he could not have imagined when the process began. The curiosity that had led him to investigate inconsistencies in historical records had evolved into systematic dedication to advancing human knowledge and capabilities. The scholarly skills that had made him effective at archival research had expanded to include techniques for accessing and integrating information that existed beyond normal physical reality. But perhaps most importantly, the ethical sensitivity that had always characterized his approach to learning had deepened into wisdom, capable of addressing moral questions that challenged every assumption about individual responsibility and collective welfare. The network's activities operated in territories where the consequences of decisions could affect entire civilizations across periods measured in centuries, requiring judgment that balanced immediate needs against long-term implications in ways that conventional moral reasoning was never designed to handle. The peaceful completion that settled over him as he contemplated the transformation his life had undergone carried the deep satisfaction that came from discovering purposes that aligned perfectly with his highest aspirations and deepest capabilities. The conspiracy of the 13 had claimed him not through dramatic revelation, but through gradual recognition of potential that had always been present, but had required proper circumstances and guidance to manifest fully. His work with the network represented not departure from his true nature, but fulfillment of possibilities that had been waiting throughout his entire life for the right moment to emerge. As the sun set over the valleys and mountains that contained so many hidden archives and secret projects, Brother Alduin's Rest understood that his individual story was simultaneously reaching completion and beginning a new phase that would extend far into the future. The gentle conspiracy that had preserved humanity's heritage through centuries of shadow and secrecy was preparing to enter an era of more open activity, guided by individuals like himself who had been prepared through careful training to manage the transition safely. The ancient whispers that had first drawn him into the mystery had become the foundation for a life of service that would continue until his own voice joined the chorus of those who had dedicated themselves to advancing human knowledge and capabilities toward the remarkable goals that remained to be achieved. The legacy of the 13 would persist through the commitment of each generation of guardians who accepted responsibility for carrying their vision forward into times and circumstances that could not be predicted, but could be prepared for through the timeless principles that had guided their original mission. The peaceful completion of one phase of the great work marked the beginning of another, as eternal and enduring as the love for humanity that had motivated the conspiracy's founders to risk everything for the sake of preserving and advancing the treasures of human achievement and potential that now waited patiently for the wisdom and dedication necessary to bring them safely into the light of common knowledge and universal benefit. The years flowed by, like gentle streams converging into a great river, carrying Brother Alduin's Rest deeper into the timeless rhythms of the network's eternal mission. His hair had begun to show touches of silver that reflected the candlelight in his private study, while his hands bore the permanent ink stains that marked a lifetime devoted to the preservation and transmission of knowledge. The young scholar, who had once stumbled upon forbidden documents in a dusty archive, had evolved into a master guardian whose wisdom guided the development of human civilization with the same patient care that gardeners bring to tending precious seeds through seasons of growth and harvest. The archive facility he had created beneath the ancient ruins had become a center of learning that attracted researchers from across Tamriel, though few who visited there understood the true scope of the knowledge it contained or the purposes it served. To most observers, it appeared to be simply another scholarly institution where dedicated researchers pursued advanced studies in historical and theoretical subjects. Only those who had been properly prepared could perceive the deeper layers of wisdom that waited beneath such mundane appearances, techniques, and understanding that could transform individual consciousness and reshape entire civilizations. Sister Valdris had passed peacefully into the eternal sleep that eventually claimed even the most dedicated guardians, her final years spent in quiet satisfaction as she witnessed the network's expansion and the successful advancement of projects she had helped to initiate. Her memorial service at the temple had drawn colleagues from throughout Skyrim and beyond, scholars and researchers who had benefited from her guidance without fully understanding the true nature of her contributions to their development. Brother Alduin's Rest had spoken at the ceremony of her dedication to learning and her gift for nurturing wisdom in others, words that carried deeper meanings for those who possessed the knowledge to understand them. The conspiracy of the 13 had continued its patient work through individuals like himself, adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining the essential principles that had guided its mission across the centuries. New technologies and social developments created both opportunities and challenges that the ancient founders had never anticipated, but the frameworks they had established proved remarkably adaptable to novel situations. The network's members learned to work within contemporary institutions and cultural contexts while advancing goals that transcended the limitations of any particular era or society. Brother Alduin's Rest's own contributions to this great work had accumulated across decades of dedicated service, each project and decision adding to a legacy that would persist long after his individual involvement had ended. The students he had trained now served as senior network members themselves, carrying forward techniques and understanding that would shape the development of future generations. The archives he had established continued to grow and evolve, their automated research systems pursuing investigations that built upon foundations he had helped to create. The broader transformation of human civilization proceeded with the steady inevitability of changing seasons, progress so gradual that each generation experienced it as natural development rather than guided advancement. Educational opportunities had expanded throughout Tamriel in ways that promoted critical thinking and ethical reasoning, while technological innovations appeared at carefully managed rates that enhanced capabilities without disrupting social stability. Cultural attitudes had shifted toward greater appreciation for cooperation and mutual benefit, creating conditions that would support the more dramatic changes that future decades would bring. The monitoring reports that crossed his desk each month documented advances in dozens of areas that the 13 had identified as crucial for humanity's long-term welfare. Agricultural techniques that increased productivity while maintaining soil health were spreading through farming communities that had no idea their innovations derived from ancient research. Crafting methods that produced superior materials were being adopted by artisans who believed they had discovered the improvements through their own experimentation. Even political developments that promoted more enlightened approaches to governance reflected network influence, operating through channels that maintained complete discretion about their true sources. But perhaps most remarkably, the network itself had begun to evolve beyond the structures and methods that had characterized its operations since the 13's time. New members brought perspectives and capabilities that enhanced the organization's effectiveness while challenging traditional approaches to some aspects of its mission. Advanced techniques for consciousness expansion and knowledge integration were making it possible to accelerate the training process without compromising safety or ethical development. Communication methods that operated across vast distances with unprecedented clarity were enabling coordination between network facilities that had previously worked in relative isolation. Brother Alduin's Rest found deep satisfaction in witnessing these developments, recognizing them as signs that the conspiracy had achieved the ultimate success that its founders had hoped for but could never have guaranteed. The organization they had created to preserve human knowledge and guide civilization's advancement had become self-sustaining and adaptive, capable of continuing its mission regardless of what challenges or opportunities the future might bring. The 13's vision of humanity achieving its full potential was no longer a distant dream, but an inevitable outcome whose realization was simply a matter of time and continued dedication. His evening walks through the temple grounds had become meditations on the mystery of time and continuity, contemplation of the ways that individual lives connected across centuries to create chains of causation that shaped the development of entire civilizations. The stones beneath his feet had been worn smooth by countless pilgrims and scholars, each leaving traces of their passage while contributing to patterns that extended far beyond their individual understanding. The ancient conspirators whose whispers had first drawn him into this great work had become part of that timeless community of seekers whose dedication transcended mortality itself. The manuscripts that surrounded him in his study held knowledge that spanned millennia, wisdom that had been preserved through the careful devotion of guardians who had accepted responsibility for ensuring that humanity's heritage would survive whatever catastrophes might threaten its continuity. Each page represented countless hours of research and contemplation, efforts that had been undertaken not for personal recognition, but for the sake of benefits that might not be realized for generations. The conspiracy of the 13 had created a tradition of service that transformed individual scholarship into participation in projects that operated on scales normally associated with divine rather than mortal endeavor. As the seasons turned and his own contribution to the great work approached its natural conclusion, Brother Alduin's rest experienced the profound peace that came from understanding his place in patterns that extended infinitely beyond the boundaries of personal existence. The network would continue its patient mission through the dedication of countless individuals who would discover, as he had, that their deepest fulfillment came from serving purposes that transcended individual achievement or recognition. The knowledge preserved by the 13 would eventually reach all of humanity, transforming civilization in ways that would realize the ancient conspirators' most optimistic visions of human potential. The gentle legacy they had created would persist through the commitment of each generation of guardians who accepted the responsibility of carrying ancient wisdom forward into uncertain but promising futures. The conspiracy that had begun with 13 dragon priests gathering in secret chambers had evolved into something far more enduring than its founders had dared to hope. A tradition of dedicated service that embodied humanity's highest aspirations for knowledge, wisdom, and beneficial progress toward greater understanding of existence itself. And so, in the quiet places of memory, where all true achievements find their eternal rest, the story of the 13's forbidden conspiracy continues its gentle influence on the development of human civilization. Their whispered secrets have become the foundation for countless lives dedicated to preserving and advancing the treasures of accumulated wisdom, ensuring that humanity's journey toward its destined greatness proceeds with the careful guidance that such transformation requires. In the deep silence that settles over ancient temples when the last candles have burned low and the final pages have been turned, the conspiracy of the 13 rests in eternal peace, its mission accomplished not through dramatic conquest, but through the patient love of those who understood that the greatest victories are won, not in moments but across the patient turning of centuries, gentle as morning mist, enduring as the stones that remember all who have walked these sacred paths in service to knowledge, wisdom, and the endless potential that dwells within the human heart.